It's 2002 and I'm wearing puka shells, cord shorts, and I actually still have hair. I actually did have hair at one point, don't laugh. Also in 2002, Puerto Rico was launched. It hit the board game scene, from what I hear at least, because I was busy doing my hair, to rave reviews. Nobody had really ever seen any sort of board game like it before, and even to this day, I think there's still quite a few things that are pretty unique compared to other games. Yeah, believe it or not, there were actual nerds back then that would just play a game for its mechanics. Art and production value had no weight whatsoever. And that's one of the reasons I kind of have ignored it up until this point. And if you watch my Barrage video, this is the second in a series of videos where I go through games that frankly I've ignored up until this point. They're just looked boring and bland. And Puerto Rico definitely fits in that category. Thematically, it's had a complicated past. There's tons of videos out there about its complicated thematic past, and to say it's complicated is incredibly kind. If you want to be educated on that, go check that out. Since then, there has been a new version of it, Puerto Rico 1987, which is the copy I'm using now, which has redeemed the theme a little bit and placed it much further into the future in a narrow space of time where Puerto Rico was actually independent. This video is a discussion on the mechanics. Specifically, we're going to give you a little bit of an overview, of course, but the things that make games beautiful in my mind are the details. We're going to go deep down into the details of this game, and I'm going to explain to you in 3 reasons why you really should probably play it at least once in your life. And the first reason is actually related to the overview. So I'm going to knock out 2 birds with 1 stone. It has an incredibly simple rule set. To start off, actions in this game are taken using rolls. There's a number of rolls out on the table, and basically a turn is governed by somebody selecting an action. They're taking a bonus printed on the action, and then everyone else does the same action. You continue around the table, each person selecting a different action until you end a round. Once you end a round, all of the unselected rolls or actions get a coin put on them as a little bit of an incentive to make sure somebody selects it sometime. But ultimately, why do you play all games? Almost always to score victory points. So how do you score victory points in Puerto Rico? Shipping goods gets you victory points. You get 1 point per good, unless of course you're the one to select the roll. In that situation, you get an extra victory point. But how do you get goods? Well, that's another roll. You produce goods. For every active estate and production building, with the exception of corn is a very big exception, you get to produce 1 good. And to produce goods, the aforementioned estates have to be acquired. That is yet another roll. Select this action, and if you're the one that selects it, you're the only one that can choose this special estate, a quarry, which once it's active, you get a discount on buildings. Everyone else has to choose from a market of sorts of different estates. So those estates represent the different goods in the game. There's 5 of them: corn, fruit, sugar, coffee, and tobacco. And the majority of the game revolves around the production of those goods. So I had mentioned discounts on buildings and also needing production buildings to actually produce. So how do you get buildings? Well, good news, there is a roll for that. You select it and you go and buy buildings. Buildings have a couple little quirks. If you select the roll, you get a discount on it. And if you have active quarries, you get a discount on the building. Depending on the building row that it's in, you can get a bigger and bigger discount, depending if you have the number of quarries. This is where you buy both production and commercial buildings. The production buildings, like I said, produce stuff. The commercial buildings give you special powers, which we're going to get to. We just mentioned buildings and needing to buy them. How on earth do you get money? Well, you can get money a couple different ways in this game. I had already mentioned that quarries essentially produce money for you at the moment of buying. However, you can also go and sell a good. You place a good on the board and take the money associated with it. Corn has 0 value. It could technically have 1 value. If you're the one to select the roll, you get a bonus coin. In this instance, you would get 1. You can select adventurer. That just gives you a coin and gives everyone else zilch. So if you want to roll in the riches and not give anyone else anything whatsoever, you can be an adventurer. There's a super secret, sneaky way to do it by buying the right buildings out from underneath your competitors. Like I said, we'll get to that in the future. And I'd already mentioned all unused rolls from the previous round get coins placed on them. So sometimes those can build up and can pay you pretty handsomely. You're selecting rolls. Everyone else does the same roll. You need estates. You need buildings to produce. You have to go and ship the goods away. If you need some money, you can sell some of those goods instead of shipping them for victory points. I mean, that's basically it. Victory points come in the form of shipped goods. They also come in the form of buildings, and they can come in the form of large building bonuses. There's also some special building powers that give you extra victory points when you do something. Like I said, we'll get to all of that, but that's the game in a nutshell. It survives on an incredibly simple rule set with an exception. Mini games I can kind of overview pretty quickly. I can give you 2 to 3 minutes so you get an idea of like what the game's trying to do. But generally those overviews just seem lifeless. They might intrigue you or pique your interest, but there's a second layer of rules, I typically referred to as rules overhead, and there's no difference here in Puerto Rico. However, they are teeny tiny restrictions, and this is the second point in which I think you should probably try this game, and one in which I really, really like it. But there's these teeny tiny restrictions on many of the actions I already described that create, maybe an environment of toxicity. They create the ability to make this game significantly more interactive, much more take that than almost any other Euro game I have ever played in my life. And they create a dynamic play state that is constantly changing, that asks you to do much more than just multiplayer solitaire. First of which is the recruiter role. There is a workers registrar that starts with a number of workers equal to the number of players, but is then populated based upon the empty building. So you can get these instances where somebody might select recruiter and the number of workers that are available are imbalanced. And why that's important is because how those are selected. You see, if you select recruiter, you get to take a bonus worker. That's great. That is your bonus. But then you are the first one to choose said worker. And then you go around the table, everyone choosing a worker. If that number is even to the number of players, the person that selected a role gets their bonus and everyone gets their worker. However, if you have a moment of imbalance where there's more workers than there are people playing the game, which absolutely happens, the person that selected the role not only is getting the bonus, but they're also getting the last worker because it went all the way around the table and there were still some left. This presents a opportunistic play consistently that could sort of feel bad, especially if you're the one that has those empty buildings, that is creating those extra workers, and somebody in front of you chooses the recruiter and steals all of the workers. That can put you back an entire round or more, and it can be a quite devious play, which highlights the very first toxic play that I have come across in Puerto Rico. The next one is the trader. It is a very simple action. You sell one good. However, there's a very interesting restriction on the trading house. See, the trading house can only have one of each type of good before it's full and completely cleared. If somebody sells a specific good in front of you and that is the only good that you have to sell, unless you have some special building, you can't sell it. So imagine a world in which you are looking at the player in front of you. They have the good to sell and you have a choice. You can either, maybe sell the more expensive good, or maybe you just really want to screw them. They're starting to run away with the game. You sell the one good that they need to sell. This is the toxic choice. It might not be the most optimal choice for your particular game, but it might be. There's this idea of defensive plays in this game, and that is absolutely one of them that unfortunately my wife has employed on me quite often. The captain is probably the most important role in the entire game. It's essentially how you score a significant number of your victory points. See, when you select captain, you get to choose all of one good and fill a boat with it. If you fill a boat, that boat is going to get cleared after the action and that boat will be empty for the next turn. If you don't, there's open spaces left on the boat for somebody else to go and put goods in. They might choose to fill a different boat. See, you get 2 to 3 boats depending on player count, and they could choose to sell a totally different good. If you remember, there's 5 goods and now only up to 3 boats. So that means at maximum, only 3 goods can be sold every time this role is selected. And these boats have a variable number of spaces, I believe 4 to 6. I could be wrong on that. And the simple math becomes quite devious as you start to look at other players and the number of goods that they have to sell. Maybe you see a partially full boat that you could continue to fill up, but instead you choose to fill up a boat completely with a good that somebody else really needs to sell. You essentially can freeze people out from selling those goods. You might say, well, just sell it next time. I'll choose the role next time. However, unfortunately, at the end of this role, everybody has to get rid of all of their goods but one. This teeny tiny little wrinkle restriction on needing to only put one type of good in each boat, and also you lose everything at the end of the roll's action phase. Whew. This leads to lots of feel bad moments, and every single time you're doing the math on what to put in a boat, you're thinking about how do you screw another player. That is 100% your thought process. Yeah, you're trying to maximize the number of barrels that you could possibly ship on this particular turn. However, it just so happens that that typically coincides with screwing somebody else. Often, especially when you select the roll, you'll have multiple choices, and I don't know about you, but my wife and I, and basically everyone I've ever played with on BGA always chooses the option to screw the player next in line. You can also be extra devious and see how much money somebody has, see how strapped they are for cash, and basically manipulate it so they have to put all of their most expensive crop out onto a boat, and they can't hold back that one barrel of coffee or tobacco that's going to yield them enough coins to then go and buy that really great building the next turn. That is high level Puerto Rico play. The builder is pretty simple. The restriction is scarcity. There's anywhere from 1 to 3 copies of these buildings depending on player count, and that is absolutely limited. The best buildings are the most limited, and you can be toxic if maybe you see somebody, you know, maybe they're stacking the tobacco estates and you see that there's only one tobacco production building. You might buy it just to hose them. Maybe you're not producing tobacco, but you do get the points on the building and the added benefit of smiling in your competitor's face as their face melts. There's a similar situation with scarcity in Planter. When you go and get estates, you have the choice of any of the estates on the market. That market is limited. It doesn't get refilled, and you can also hate draft there. If you see somebody that maybe has gotten the tobacco production building but doesn't have the tobacco yet, maybe you take that tobacco estate in front of them. Granted, you can also take what is most beneficial to you, but what fun is that? With the craftsman, you're looking at other players' boards. You're seeing, do they have the workers yet to staff the buildings to be able to produce the goods? Remember, you need to have workers on both your estate and production building in order to produce the goods. So maybe they've just made that big investment on that tobacco production building, and you go and select production before they have a chance to produce that. Granted, they'll eventually get to produce, but that gives you an advantage of being able to produce in front of them, and maybe they're not producing optimally at that point. Maybe they really need that tobacco to be able to sell it, to get the coins, to get that building you wanted. Hopefully what I've demonstrated here is there's a really simple rule set with teeny tiny restriction augmentations that then use simple arithmetic to help you to screw other players. And that is why the toxicity in this game is something I really haven't come across in any other Euro game, and I kind of like it. All right, and the last reason you really should try this game is there is so much to explore. Like I already just mentioned, there's a meta game in trying to screw somebody with kind of the basic rules, but these commercial buildings create so many different tiny breaks to the rules or little benefits you get when you do something else that opens up a variety of paths to victory. In this game, there's not a clear happy path, especially if you're not playing with a complete expert who has played, you know, countless games. If you are exploring this with your game group for the first time and continue to play it over time, there is so much to explore in grabbing buildings and combinations and the little extra stuff you get to do when you get these buildings. It's incredible. And the metagame analysis that has been done on BGG in the forums is crazy. I'll link a few in the description if you're interested, but I do think, and this was brought up in my Discord, the fun of these types of games is the exploration. I've had to read these as in research for this, and I almost wished I didn't, because now I kind of have some secret knowledge. Although I did play my wife just last night, we actually tied with all of my wonderful knowledge of the game, and I won off of tiebreaker, but neither here nor there. I still think it would give you a significant advantage if you understood the happy path, or at least kind of the logic map that you need to run through, which is also part of this. It's, you don't just go grab a building and do a thing. This is very much a chess match. There are counters to you grabbing buildings and doing certain things that you can do through these commercial buildings. I'm not going to run through all of these commercial buildings because I kind of want you, if you're interested, to go and explore them yourself, but I'll give you a couple of my absolute favorites. The Wharf is one of them, in which I love, especially when somebody is bullying you on the shipping of goods, because guess what? You get your own little ghost ship off to the side where you can ship your own stuff. So they can't screw you and, continue to place their goods in front of yours, fill up the boats that you really, really needed. It's a break in the game rules that makes it so much more fun and is a mid to later game counter to somebody using the take that mechanism against you too much. The Factory is another favorite of mine, but it's not like I discovered this thing. This is a notorious overpowered building that you should be going after time and time again. This is the one point in the game where the designer has said he misdesigned and probably should be the cost of 8 instead of 7 to acquire. Regardless, it gives you coins for production. So you're doing two things at one time. You don't have to sell goods any longer because you get coins depending on the number of different goods that you've produced, essentially erasing the need for you to choose that action completely. It's awesome. On top of that, if you have the 1897 edition, I believe there's 19 extra buildings that are associated with a couple different expansions that happened. There's also a new type of worker mechanism where they're called citizens that was added on. So there's even more to explore in terms of buildings and the metagame that you can personally have in your group. There is a ton to explore here, and I can't stress enough how wonderful it is to have multiple paths to victory and not somebody racing up a particular track, Arnak, to get the victory each and every time, or at least that's what it's devolved to in our house. At the end of the day, like I said, this is unlike any Euro I've ever played. This is not multiplayer solitaire. This is highly interactive, highly dynamic game state that has multiple paths to victory, tons of strategy to explore. If that sounds good, this is definitely something you want. I will recognize that there is a big part of the population, especially Eurocentric players, that might not like the ability to screw people over and over again, but that is certainly a feature here. I will say there is a counter, and if you don't know what that counter is, go read the forums. It'll be there, or explore it for yourself, get beat a couple times and find your way around it, which to me is fun. I mean, I like to go through games knowing I don't care about winning this time. I'm going to explore a particular different path and just see what works, see what happens. And this is that type of game. This is a sandbox you can go into, try different stuff. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't, but hey, reset and try again. It's also relatively quick. I mean, these games, especially once people know what they're doing, can get going pretty quickly. I don't think I mentioned in-game states or building all of your building slots, using all of the workers, or there's a limited number of points that you're gaining through basically shipping stuff and other bonuses that once that pile of points is gone, the game end triggers. And that's it. But really quick before we go, I want to thank the 4 new members to the Neon Gorillas Cardboard Club YouTube membership. Tristan, Dallin, Michael, and Mike, thank you so much for your support. I really appreciate it. If you're at all interested in supporting the dream of a balding middle-aged man in a midlife crisis, go ahead and check out that join right below. You'll be prompted to a video. We've got a Discord. It's 10 people strong, but it's pretty active for 10 people. I've had a really good time getting to know everybody. But with all of that said, I mean, you just being here, making it to this point in the video is huge. It really, really helps overall. I'm just trying to make this channel solvent long-term, we'll say. Have yourself a great week.